Hello all. Thank you for taking the time to respond to this email. I am still frightened by what I witnessed that night, and can still only come up with one reasonable explanation for what we saw, even if it is an explanation that proves to me that the existence of the supernatural really does exist. I guess that's why you call yourself a supernaturalist. You believe in this kind of stuff, and you have a knack for helping people talk about their encounters. Thank you for that. I guess I'll get started by telling you about what I saw that one night. It was the most insane thing that I have ever seen, to this day. I only saw it once that night, and I hope I never see it again, because I believe it is some sort of Grim Reaper or something like that. I don't know too much about these things, and I don't want to. That's just my ignorant guess as to what it could be. This encounter happened to me in San Diego, California. It was 2008, in November. There was one other person with me when I saw this hellhound thing, or whatever you want to call it. My neighbor Jim. We both saw it. I even asked him to tell me what he saw, so I knew I wasn't going crazy. What we saw was real, and it terrifies me. But I ask this: if hellhounds are real, then what else is too? My name is Juan Santos. I'm 34 years old, and I work construction for a living. I have 4 children. I'm divorced, and when my children are not with me, I live alone. I'm a smoker, and I guess this is what first led me to the run-in with this wicked creature. It was the first year that I was divorced when I saw it. Luckily, that night my kids were with my ex-wife. I don't know what I would have done if they were with me. I was freaked out enough just for myself. So, it's 1 a.m., and I'm outside having a smoke. I don't allow cigarettes in the house, since I have my children 50% of the time. So when I want one, I go in the backyard. It was late, but at this point in my life, I wasn't sleeping too much. Too many thoughts, I guess. It'd only been 5 months since my ex-wife and I had called it quits. Construction work was slow during that time of the year, and I had 4 kids I needed to buy Christmas presents for. Anyways, it's 1 a.m., I'm outside with my smoke, and I hear this barking coming from the front of my house. I didn't think anything of it at first, except that it was late and that dog was probably going to wake up the neighbors. I just ignored it myself. Whatever, it was just a barking dog. I wasn't asleep, and I wasn't going to bed anytime soon. I just kind of felt bad for my neighbors that this dog might disturb. One of them had this big Doberman pinscher, so I just figured it was him. His name was Duke, if you care. This barking sounded like it was going up and down the street, back and forth, all the way up one way and then all the way back down the other direction. I decided to have a second smoke and sat there, listening to this dog barking like crazy. It sounded to me like it was being aggressive, like it was aggravated or something, like it was barking because it was chasing something. I thought to myself, my neighbor that owned Duke, the old couple named Lane and Michelle, were gonna be in big trouble with my other neighbors in the morning. I finished my second smoke and decided to go out there and see what was going on. Maybe even wrangle up Duke and take him home. Honestly, Lane and Michelle were old enough to where they might not even hear their dog going crazy outside. So, when I went to the front yard to have a look, that's when things went from mildly annoying to this seriously can't be real. You see, I didn't see anything at first. There was no dog out in the front yard, or going up and down the street. But I could still hear the barking. There was no dog out there, just this phantom bark. I heard this thing barking from one end of the street. It ran past me. I heard it, and then it went all the way to the other end of the street. But there were no signs of a dog. Not even if a dog was black as coal. I could still be able to see it, but this was either invisible or a ghost dog or something. I know what I heard, and I began to get kind of frightened. Then, I finally saw these 2 red lights coming from me at the end of the street where the barking was going on. These little red lights looked like they were glowing, like brake lights or something. I thought to myself, it could just be bicycle reflectors, but as they got closer, I knew exactly what they were. Eyes. Then I actually caught a glimpse of this thing. It was jet black. Blacker than black, actually. like the shadow of a shadow. It was the size of a German Shepherd, but skinnier, and it didn't look like it was fully corporeal. Whatever this thing was, looked like it was either made of some kind of mist, or that it was blinking in and out of this world. Like a ghost, I guess. It looked like smoke. How it's there, but not really there. I couldn't see fur or teeth or anything like that. Just the outline of this creature that looked like a dog made of shadows. It was like it was seriously made of darkness. Even its hair and teeth looked like they were jet black. I could see it opening and closing its mouth when it barked. I could see the outline of the teeth, but it was like no part of this thing was actually there. When I caught a glimpse of this thing's true appearance, I was all the way up at the top of my front yard, and this thing was in the middle of the road. It wasn't too far away, but it was far enough away to where I knew if I needed to, I could run into the house quick. So I guess curiosity got the better of my fear, and I stood there and then I watched this thing. I was close enough, though, to get a whiff of this thing. It smelled like fire, like burning wood and meat, like that mesquite smell, only so much more potent. Even after it ran down the street again, this smell lingered. At this point, I think I might have even been frozen. I couldn't figure out how to make my legs work, even if I wanted to run into the house. So I just kept staring at this thing, mouth open wide and everything. I thought I either must be dreaming or going crazy. And this thing either hadn't seen me or didn't even care about me. Either way, I was just relieved. It just kept running up and down the road, back and forth, fast as I'd ever seen anything run. And the whole time, it just kept barking. How could no one else hear this? And then, my next door neighbor, Jim, came out to see what was going on. I guess he finally heard the barking too, and he scared the living shit out of me when I heard him coming up. I put my finger to my lips and signaled for him to be quiet, once my heart started beating again, and just pointed out to the street with my other hand. I guess he saw it too, because I could see his body tense up and his eyes go wide. "What the hell is that?" he kind of whispered. Maybe even been lower than a whisper. All I could do was shake my head, since I was clueless as to what was going on. So we both just stood there, scared and confused, watching this thing from my front porch as it ran up and down the street, barking this malicious-ass bark, disappearing and reappearing in and out of existence, or whatever it was doing. I really wanted to go back inside at this point, but I had already been out there so long that I needed to know what it was doing, and where it ended up. I also didn't want to leave Jim out there by himself. He actually whispered to me that he was going to call animal control, but I stopped him and told him not to. I mean, what good could they do with something like this? We were having a full-blown supernatural experience, and unless animal control was partnering with the Ghostbusters these days, they weren't going to do a lot of good in this situation. I looked over at Jim, and I told him he needed to describe everything that he was seeing to me, just so I could make sure that I wasn't going crazy. "If you are, so am I," he told me. But then he described everything back to me, exactly the way that I was seeing it. He said it was like a shadow and smoke were mixed together to make something that resembled a dog, but he couldn't see any other features, like everything was made out of the same substance. He said he could see a mouth, but no teeth, and he could see burning red eyes. He said he could hear an evil bark that was going up and down the street, and had actually listened to it for a while before he came out to see what was going on. And then he asked me if I could smell something burning too. I told him I thought it was from that thing that we were watching. He looked scared at that, and nodded at me, like he was accepting something that I hadn't thought of. After a while, as this thing was running down one way, and we could only see the back of it, it vanished into thin air. It was like 1 second it was there, and then the next it just disappeared out of existence, the way that the smoke from one of my cigarettes does. We both looked at each other in shock. He saw it disappear too. We stood there for another hour, I guess partly not wanting to go back inside alone, and partly wanting to see if it came back, and partly to talk about what the hell we had just seen. We went over all the details again. I described it to him, and he described it back to me again. We went through my whole pack of smokes, even though I didn't even know that Jim was a smoker. He said he just needed to calm his nerves. He told me that when I said I smelled like it was burning, he immediately thought of something demonic, and that's when he used the term hellhound, which is why I'm using that term in this email. I was under the impression that a hellhound was a dog that guarded vampires when they were asleep, but apparently they're entities that usher souls to hell, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't know which was true. Either way, Greg seemed to know a little more about the subject than I did, so I just went with it. After an hour had passed, we decided that if it was going to come back, it wasn't going to make itself known, and then we decided that it wasn't going to come back at all. If it did, we'd meet on my porch to watch it again. We both needed sleep, but before I slept, I went and wrote down all of the details so I wouldn't forget anything. Even though that this was an encounter that I'll never forget, the next morning was even more shocking to me. But when I did go outside, I was shocked to see a police car and a coroner down the street at another neighbor's house. The whole hellhound thing started revving up in my head again. I knew somebody in there was dead. Obviously because the coroner was there, but also because that hellhound was running towards that house when it disappeared. It turned out that another one of our neighbors, who I won't name due to respect for his family, had committed suicide the night before. Pills, I guess. Apparently, he was in some kind of trouble with the law and decided it wasn't worth it. Again, I'm not going to share the details of what he was getting charged with. And besides, I've only heard rumors anyway. No facts about it. But apparently, he wasn't the friendly neighbor that I talked to while I passed his house. I guess everyone has a secret or two, right? His was just a lot worse than most, if those rumors were true. This whole thing made me rethink my point of view on the occult and the paranormal, and so is your channel, Supernaturalist. After listening to the stories you guys share on YouTube, it makes me realize that there are a lot of things out there, just like this hellhound creature, that other people don't talk about or don't believe in. Either way, I know other people have encountered things like this, and I'm looking forward to hearing them. Keep doing what you do. You help a lot of people. Sincerely, Juan Santos. Me and my wife rented our first house back in 2012. There was nothing creepy or particularly off-putting about it, just a standard terraced house on a street of identical houses in the northern town of England. My wife was pregnant at the time, so we needed somewhere to bring up our first child. We chose this one as it was an area we were both familiar with, and rent was affordable. When we first moved in, everything was normal, just a standard house, and we set about getting furnishings and all the usual stuff. I used to take my wife to work in the early morning. I'd drop her off and come back home. The front door opened directly into the living room, and there was a sliding door from this room which went into the kitchen. This had a door going out to the back to an enclosed yard shared with nearby houses and the stairs leading upstairs. There was also a frosted glass window next to the sliding door which was presumably once used as a serving hatch, but now just served to let some natural light in, as the sun never got to the front of the house due to the narrow street and the surrounding houses. Within a few weeks of moving in, I developed a weird feeling, like something was watching me through the window. It wasn't overpowering by any means, but it did get to the point whereby I'd actively avoid looking at it out of the corner of my eye, as some part of me always worried I might see something on the other side looking back at me. I'd always been deeply skeptical of anything paranormal, so always tried to ignore it or laugh it off as me just being stupid in an unfamiliar house. That said, the feeling became stronger to the point that after dropping my wife off at work, I'd come home and catch a few hours on the sofa in the living room as I didn't want to go into the kitchen and up the stairs to bed. The feeling was definitely strongest in the kitchen and on the stairs, and the only way I can describe it is, it felt like it was predatory, like the constant nagging feeling that something was either watching you or right over your shoulder about to rush you, even though there was nothing there that could be seen by the naked eye. Things seriously escalated after one particular evening. We were watching a Darren Brown TV show, whereby he was disproving the idea of paranormal and seances. Part of the show actually asked you to perform a Ouija board at home, and the premise was that he would lead the responses and tell you what the results would be that you were going to get, thereby removing any idea of it being anything more than suggestion and a parlor trick. My skeptical nature, combined with my wife's belief in the paranormal, meant that I was keen to go along with this, just to prove her how silly her beliefs were. We started the Ouija board and went along with all the instructions, except we didn't get the results that the show said we would. We got something far more sinister. When we asked the name of the spirit, rather than the scripted name we were supposed to get, we got the name Ernest. By this point, I'm laughing, thinking my wife is pranking me and that Ernest was a stupid name to come up with. My wife isn't laughing though, and says we should stop. Thinking it's all her, I go along with it though. Do you like us living here, Ernest? The Ouija board went to no. Why not, Ernest? What do you think of me? The Ouija board spelled out the word rogue. Now, it's worth mentioning that this confused me. My only experience with the word rogue was as various classes in video games. Okay, well, what do you think of my wife? The Ouija board actually spelled out the word whore. Now, at this point, my wife is getting more upset by the moment, and she's really quite distressed. We follow the rules and say goodbye. The glass we were using as a planchette goes to goodbye. The board we were using was actually made out of scraps of paper with letters and numbers and the usual yes, no, hello, and goodbye on them. As my wife was so freaked out by this, I collected them together, put them in a glass bowl, and took them out to the yard and burned them. Partly for her peace of mind, partly for my own. I have to admit, it was kind of creepy. Around 20 minutes or so after we went to bed that night, we heard this loud bang that came from downstairs. I went downstairs to check on everything, thinking something may have fallen over, but everything was still in place, so I went back to bed, confused but not creeped out. As we lived in a terrace house, I told my wife it might just be the neighbors banging a cupboard door, and then we went to sleep. The next night after we went to bed, within the first half hour of being in bed, the exact same bang happened downstairs. And this happened every night, no matter what time we went to bed. Whether it was 9 p.m. or 1 a.m., within half an hour, we heard the exact same bang. Always at least once. Sometimes maybe twice. We tried to replicate the noise, and after trying everything, we discovered that a heavy cupboard door in the corner of the kitchen, when opened then let go, made the exact same noise. I have to admit, I was pretty intrigued and keen to find out what this was, as we'd never had any signs of pets or vermin, and the cupboard was fixed to the wall about 6 feet off the ground. So I asked my wife to let me set up a camera in the kitchen so we could record it after we went to bed. Unfortunately, she wouldn't though, as she said she either didn't want to know or didn't want to antagonize it if it was anything supernatural. Things really began to go downhill from there. We'd find ourselves arguing over the smallest thing, having full-blown shouting arguments for hours over nothing. Despite normally being very chilled out, I was often accused of being too laid back even. I found myself constantly on edge, in a combination of what I can only describe as anger and anxiety. This didn't happen overnight, and was something that built up slowly, with both of us, to the point I didn't notice it was happening until much later. There was no waking up a different person moment, but a slow and subtle change. Despite it never happening before, I began suffering from nightmares on a regular basis. I would have vivid dreams of family members dying in horrific ways, like being burned alive. I'd wake up screaming or in tears, and my wife would have to spend an hour reassuring me they weren't real and calming me down. The most disturbing thing, though, was when she told me that she would constantly toss and turn due to being heavily pregnant, and when she'd look over at me, I would just be laying there with my eyes wide open, staring blankly, like I was asleep, but with my eyes open, and when she told me to close them, I would, with no other reaction or comment. I have absolutely no recollection of ever doing this, and have never done this at any point before, or since living in that place. The arguments continued, and got worse. The regular bang at night continued, and the all-over sense that something was following me, particularly in the kitchen and the stairwell, became more and more overpowering, despite my best efforts to convince myself that I was being ridiculous, and trying to make myself walk slowly up the stairs. I was clearing that flight of stairs 3 steps at a time, and I was filled with adrenaline and my heart pounding inside my ears. There was a brief lull in activity in the month or so before our child was born. It was around Christmas, and the arguments had abated, and we seemed to get back to ourselves. I thought we'd turned a corner. The nightly bang persisted, but we'd become so used to it at that point that now we would just look at each other and roll our eyes. My wife told me that the kitchen and the living room window, and the sense of being watched or followed, was something that she experienced too. Then, our little boy was born, and everything was okay for the first week or so, but the atmosphere soon began to change. That sense of anger and anxiety began to creep back in, and we were starting to bicker again. The atmosphere was made worse as our newborn baby would just cry constantly, every hour of the day that he was in that house. He'd only sleep for 20-minute intervals, and the rest of the time would be spent trying to nurse, wind, feed, distract, play, anything to try and soothe him, but nothing worked. We had him back and forth to the hospitals, and so many times in the first few months the doctors looked at us like we were crazy, because every time we would get there, he was calm and sleeping, or gurgling happily. I was beginning to think I was cracking up myself, but when we got home, the crying would begin again. We ended up taking turns to see him at night, but this wasn't helped by the fact that I now apparently was doing that weird sleeping with my eyes open thing again. I think it culminated for me one night when I was laid in bed, waiting for the inevitable cry to start, when I saw a shadow form in the corner nearest the window and began to slowly move across the fitted wardrobes that we had in the room. I initially thought it was being created by the curtains against the headlights of a car moving slowly down the road or something, but it wasn't moving right. The best comparison I can make is that of ink dropped into water. The room was dark, so we could try and help the boy sleep, but this was darker than the rest of the room, like a very rich black, and seemed to have shapes like smoky tendrils or something coming off of it. I laid and watched as it inched along the cupboards and then watched it go around a corner and continue on the wall. I knew at this point it wasn't a shadow, as a shadow would have just jumped from the wardrobe to the wall, not creep around the corner that was facing in the opposite direction to the window. I watched it go out of the door and onto the stairs. If this sort of happened to me at this point in my life, now I would have noped straight out of the room. But at the time, I remember being oddly mesmerized by it, and only started to feel any kind of fear after it left the room. I resolved not to tell my wife, just because we'd already experienced enough weirdness to be on edge, and the idea that I may have just seen a manifestation would probably upset her even more. It was winter at this point, and the house was constantly cold, not helped by how dark it was due to the sunlight being unable to make its way in. No matter what we tried, we couldn't get the place to maintain a constant, comfortable temperature. One room may be red hot, but the next it would be freezing, despite the heating being set to the same throughout the house. The rooms that experienced hot or cold varied from hour to hour. The temperature would spike in a room only to fall again to an uncomfortably cold in the space of half an hour. We had a room thermometer for our baby, and we were having to constantly move from room to room to try and find one that was relatively normal that we could keep him in. Unfortunately, I found the one place in the house where the temperature remained the most stable were the stairs and the landing. So I'd find myself having to sit there, fighting that rising anxiety to run, because it was the one place where our child could either not be overheating or wrapped in blankets against the cold. Around this time, I remember a dream quite clearly where I was talking to a woman. No idea who she was, and she was saying how dark and cold the house was. She asked me if I knew what that meant. I said not. I remember even now when she said that life needs light to grow. The only thing that can thrive in darkness is death. It may have been my overactive paranoia or subconscious, but I clearly remember waking up with those words still in my head. Now, when I hear a lot of these stories, I often wonder why people didn't just get out. There's usually excuses about not wanting to surrender their home and fighting for their house. Well, this wasn't our house. We were just renting it, and all the combined problems and weirdness just got to be too much. we decided we had to move. We found a house a few miles away and gave our notice on the place. It was the night before we were due to move. In the early hours of the morning, we heard a piercing siren. We had a carbon monoxide alarm, and it was going off. We opened all the doors and windows and got outside. My wife and our boy went to my parents while I waited for the gas engineer. He arrived and immediately condemned the gas fire we had in the living room, which had started leaking carbon monoxide. It's difficult not to think that without that alarm, we could have all been dead. And the fact it happened on the day we were due to leave? I couldn't shake the idea that the two were linked, and something either wanted us not to leave, or to give us one final parting gift. I'd like to say we moved and everything was better overnight, but it wasn't. The new house started out okay, but that nagging feeling of being followed around slowly crept back. Not as intense, but noticeably there. In this house, we all shared a bedroom and had a lot of stuff still packed in boxes and generally cluttered in a spare room. One of them was a bouncer for our baby. This was one of those Fisher-Price frog-type bouncers and had eyes on the front, which, when rolled, would play a tune. Well, one night around 4 a.m., the frog tune starts going off. I immediately looked at the crib next to our bed, thinking our baby might have gotten out somehow and started playing with it, but he was fast asleep. I did everything I could to get it to go off again without spinning the eyes. I tried knocking on it, hitting it on the floor. Nothing. I tried to tell myself that it was maybe just the batteries, but this was the only time it ever happened, and we didn't have to change the batteries for the next 2 years or so that we had it. The feeling of being watched grew, only now it was strongest from a conservatory on the back of the property. My wife and I had been through enough by this point, and we were now openly discussing the weird feelings with each other. There were a set of double doors between the kitchen and the conservatory, and this one particular night, my wife asked that I close them. I didn't ask why, I just did so. About an hour or so later, I decided to go back out there for a smoke. As I opened the doors, the glass-paneled French doors of the conservatory were in front of me. It was dark outside, so all I could see in the doors was the reflection of the lit kitchen behind me. As I walked towards the doors to see the reflection, I very clearly see a black silhouette of a person run behind me, almost like it ran into the house through the exterior wall and straight through under the stairs. My first thought was someone was outside, but as I checked, no one was there. So I just stood there smoking and thinking about it, and I realized something. It couldn't have been outside, as the figure passed behind me and was briefly obscured by my own reflection, so it had to have been in the room behind me. I quickly finished my cigarette and go back inside, and then I sat there, mulling it over before telling my wife the next day. To which she said she wanted the door shut as she hadn't felt comfortable about that room all day, more so than normal. We had a similar instance a month or so later, which could have ended badly. Whilst driving and pulling onto the motorway slip road, my wife all of a sudden jumped on the brakes. When I asked what the hell she was doing, she said a dark figure had just run out in front of the car. There was literally no one around, as the slip road was in a wooded area away from any built-up spots or paths. I didn't see this myself, as I was in the back of the car with our boy, but my mother-in-law was in the front, and she said she saw it too, and was equally as spooked as my wife. Gradually since then, the feelings of anxiety and tension subsided, and we eventually moved again. Mirroring our experience of leaving the last place though, on the day we were moving, we were taking our belongings down to the drive to a van when a roof tile slid off and narrowly missed hitting me or my brother-in-law in the head. We moved to a house which, out of any, should have been the most haunted, having been built earlier than the others in the 1830s. This house, however, was the most tranquil and had no such weird atmosphere or happenings. All of this started 8 years ago and finally ended 6 years ago. We often walk past the first house and have seen it come up for rent many times since then, so nobody really seems to stay there long. I can't help but think that they're experiencing the same things that we did. The funny thing is, we've both said a few times how when we see it on the market, we both have a desire to go back. We've even talked about going in for a fake viewing, just to walk around the place. We never have though, but even the idea that after everything we still feel an urge to go back is something to which the rational part of my brain just can't really explain. I'm so tempted to go back through all the old census records to see if an Ernest ever lived there, but so far I've resisted the temptation to rake it all over for fear of setting something off again. That, along with the idea of finding out that somebody named Ernest really did live there and kind of communicated with us on a Ouija board, well, I don't know if I would really like the answer to that. I was a caver in the early 70s, and caving back in the Whetstone Mountains. Just like every caver, me and my partners found caves of our own and decided to keep their secrets. When this life-changing event happened, we had stumbled upon a hollow cave and came to the immediate conclusion that some things can and should be kept secret. With us, we loved to explore sinkholes and short caves. They had much bigger caves, and most people don't realize that the Sonoran Desert hides dozens of miles of known caves. A lot of them are just unreachable by humans. In reality, I think it's more like thousands of miles of caves, to be honest. Is it so hard to believe that there's thousands of miles of caverns making up a subterranean world beneath the most biologically diverse desert in the entire world? The first thing we did was have a sonar guy come out, and he radared the flat pan. He scoped deep, and when he did, he started rambling on and cheering. He was all flushed and excited, claiming that there were veins and veins of tunnels underneath us. I remember one time after this, I was talking with a friend named Eric Campbell. He's a state biologist. This was back when bell bottoms were a thing, so mind you, this was a long time ago. We had a whole conversation about evolution, and I brought up the fact that if a rat can live his whole life without taking a single drink of water, what else don't we know about? He argued back to me that those kangaroo rats that I'm talking about evolved so that it gets moisture from leaves and things like that. Then he went on to describe their nasal passages and how it cools its breath through condensation and it can convert moisture into water. He said that's evolution, and I told him that was exactly my point. Evolution. He knew that we found something in those caves, although to this day I have never told him. He asked me what we found down there, but of course I didn't answer him. Over the years, he asked me a few more times if it was more than just fossils we found, but I never gave him a solid answer until now. The fossils he was referring to were from one of our digs. We had found prehistoric fossils that I showed him. They contained some trilobites and maybe a toad or turtle and a snake. But we saved the best for ourselves, never showing anybody what we found. This is what we found. It was deep in this labyrinth of caves, never before seen by humans, or at least so we think. We found a fossil of something I initially thought was a pterodactyl. We separated the buildup and we discovered the wings to be attached to a biped with this massive torso and long, thick legs. This was no pterodactyl. This was something undiscovered. The first thing I realized was nobody would lay such an elaborate hoax miles down in an unknown cave beneath a desert to maybe be found by some caver sometime in the next 1,000 years. The truth be told, we didn't want anyone else to know about it because I still believe that this wasn't some animal that we found. It was some kind of beast. This thing was just too unbelievable. The best thing I could ascertain, judging from the stream layering, was that this thing was probably from the Mesozoic era, somewhere between the Jurassic and Cretaceous period. This life form appeared to be far too advanced by my way of thinking to be organically lodged there. But then, I didn't know what it was, so anybody's guess, really. I knew if we reported this, it would either be ridiculed or falsely debunked. There was a chance now, though, that we could even be killed for what we knew. I know it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I saw that thing. It shook the conventions of everything science knows. And you have to be aware where that road can take you. I remember the three of us standing there for more than an hour after jimmying the limestone away. our flashlights just bouncing up around the pot. It appeared to be a perfectly preserved skeletal fossil of a flying, horned man, approximately 8 feet tall. The more we inspected this thing, the more adrenaline my body had to accommodate. This wasn't a natural species. I was scared. It had horns like a ram, and a 10-foot plus wingspan. It had horribly vicious teeth with claws on both hands and feet, both of which had 5 fingers and toes. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a torso. I never saw anything even close to resembling this kind of dinosaur in any grade school book. We agreed to keep our secret, and I knew I could trust them. They're honest guys, but more importantly, they're desert quasi-hermits like me. We live in modest desert homes and came here for a reason: to be away from the assholes of the world. It was 3 days before we talked to each other again, and when we did speak, I could see these guys had the same thing on their minds that I did. Did we really see that? What the hell was that thing? That weekend, we made a plan to go back down there, and once we got there, through all the twists and turns and squeezing and pushing, we ended up at the same place, facing that same impossible thing, that pristine fossil, miles along unknown caves in the Sonoran underground. It was just like we left it. This revelation. We took pictures and agreed to stay silent for the time. It was another 3 days later that I decided I'd go back down and venture into the cave on a Saturday night. It was driving me crazy. I needed to go back down there. I needed answers. But at the last minute, I felt it would be wrong to go without my partners. I called them and they were just as bothered as me. And we all met at the entry spot outside of Tombstone. We went in around 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. We got around halfway there when we heard someone else in the cave. Now, I want you to understand this. It would be bad enough to hear anyone else in the desert on a Saturday night. But when you're this deep in an unknown cave, well, then you know there's trouble. We tried to play it as cool as possible, but that's not the easiest thing to do that deep down. We heard something walking a ways down in the cave beneath us. It sounded like it was on 2 feet. And trust me, something walking on 2 feet sounds completely different than something walking on 4 feet. And whatever it was sounded heavy. Then I hear something coming from behind us, down one of the tributary tunnels. We whisper to each other about what to do and how to do it. But then the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I heard this long, purring sound directly behind us. It was from the only exit or entrance that we knew about. I almost didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned my flashlight. There was nothing there. We all knew something had just been there, though. Whatever it was moving quickly. We decided it was time to get the hell out of there, though, and that we'd come back in the morning. We got about a quarter of the way when we heard the loud purring sound, followed by these clicking noises. This time it was coming from behind us, where the fossil was. We turned our flashlights around, and the lights fell on this thing. It looked, at first, like this huge Gila monster. The eyes and skin appeared reptilian, and then it lifted its head up, and I noticed 2 things. It had sheep horns and a prominent cleft chin. A cleft chin? Are you kidding me? This thing looked like the damn devil incarnate, and we were down in a cave in a desert, no less. I suddenly felt like we'd been tricked into descending into hell. I mean, it felt like hell. It was hot and dark and scary, and we were trapped in here with this big creature, this monster. Then some reflex took over in me, and something in the other half of my brain tried to convince me that I was just looking at an animal, an organic thing that would die and decompose. A desert creature, even with this gothic face staring back at me. My logical brain told me not to get bit, or at least attacked. My way of thinking was Gila monsters are venomous, and I didn't want to risk envenomation from something so big. But then that thing stood up from the spot in the hole that it was in. All my rationalization was gone. It stood up in the dark, and you could see the wings folded behind it. And then it began sizing us up. It was standing there in the dark, this massive, human-like body, but nothing a human could ever be. It really did look like the devil incarnate. It even had gleaming yellow eyes. It took my breath away. Really, I could not breathe. Then this thing leaned forward and poked its head towards us, and it squinted at us. It dropped its mouth open, and you could hear it breathing. I could even feel the hot, dead breath boiling over us. And then, in a flash, faster than anything I've ever seen move, it disappeared in the hole below. Let me tell you, we got the hell out of there as fast as we could. When we got about 20 feet up, things behind us started to collapse. The rocks tumbled in, and the dust billowed up the shaft behind us. That only made us move faster. I did not want to be trapped in a cave-in. By the time we got out, we were amazed that we didn't get killed in the avalanche. It's terrifying to be in a cave during a crush, but it's unthinkable to be in there during a crush when something unthinkable is chasing you around. We stood there around the cars, trying to catch our breath, trying to keep our hearts from beating right out of our chest, trying to compose ourselves. I noticed the dust cloud pouring out of the cave. It looked like a smoking slick. It was like there was an explosion from the opening. It was a full-on collapse, and we were lucky that we got out of there alive. There was a great deal of talking between the three of us. We went home. I couldn't sleep. The next day, the three of us did go back. We'd only go down about 40 feet because the shaft was hopelessly slabbed off. It was crushed solid. I suppose we could have requested an excavation or some other nonsense like that, but something like that would never happen. As the days passed, we all agreed that the animal we saw down in the cave was exactly the same creature that we saw as the fossil. It was just living further down in those caves. Really, it's not that impossible to believe when you think about it, considering sharks and crocodiles haven't really evolved since the days of the dinosaur. The only difference is they're not as shocking because they live in plain sight. We're used to them by now. As far as I know, nobody else has ever made a discovery like that. Nobody's been back in that cave because nobody's ever had it excavated. And in fact, I don't even know if there's anybody else besides the three of us that know that cave even exists. And one of us has since passed. So that's only 2 people in the entire world that I know where that cave is. As far as all the pictures go that we took of that thing, well, that camera got stolen right out of the car the very next morning. That helps me believe that it's a conspiracy, and it reminds me of why I didn't want to make this discovery known from the get-go. I don't know if we'll ever figure out what that thing was, but reading all of these stories and listening to all of these encounters on YouTube makes me believe that it was not in fact some kind of natural animal that we saw, and I'm leaning more towards a paranormal encounter. I would love to hear if anybody else has witnessed something like this, or have any theories on what it could have been. A friend of mine lived in Toronto back when this happened, and during this encounter he was staying with some family down in San Diego for about a month. He'd never seen the American desert, and desperately wanted to while he was here. So I drove down from LA to fetch him, and we took the 8 East out of California, and then we jumped on the US 99 North just across the border to Arizona near Yuma. He was blown away by the sights, needless to say. He couldn't believe the view looking west. The desert comes right up to the edge of the road, so you feel like you're surrounded by it. The US 99 North itself is a cracked and patched up stretch of highway, but when you look west, it's like man was never even there. It reminded us of the old Wild West movies like in Young Guns. And then about 30 minutes outside of a place called Courtside, the sun disappeared completely, and we were in the dark, besides our headlights. We continued out on an empty road going north. I asked him if he wanted to stop by Lake Havasu, and that's when we saw something fall into the road in front of us. I slowed to a stop, and, dumbfounded, asked if those were fish lying right in front of us on the highway in the middle of the desert. And sure enough, they were fish. Fish that fell from the sky. We both got out of the car to see the fish, and to our surprise, one of them was still alive. There was one really big fish that was gasping on the pavement. Where the hell did this thing come from? All of these things just dropped right out of the sky. And obviously, there was no lake around here because we were in the middle of nowhere. Chris looked up at the dark, starry night, looking for any signs of what could have dropped the fish, and decided it was probably a bird or something nearby. Maybe there was some nearby pond somewhere, and this bird scored it from there, and then just dropped its dinner. I didn't really know what I was talking about, but when I was saying it, it seemed like a logical explanation. The two other fish that had been dropped on the road were more just heads and entrails. How they were still moving, I don't really understand. The poor big fish was still intact and alive, and I thought I could save him by tossing him in some water if I could find some. I looked around for a drainage pipe, or a puddle or something. Maybe there was a water hole around where this fish came from. But Chris looked out at the fish in the headlights, and then he told me that it was dead. I looked over at it. It wasn't gasping anymore. The poor thing really was dead. He made some sarcastic remark about mouth-to-mouth and fish CPR. We got back in the car and continued to drive. When we did, Chris started talking about the fish. It's funny, though, that this big fish was still alive. You'd think that if it dropped from way up there, it would have been smashed too. But I told him, I figured it was dropped just above the headlights. That's the only possible explanation. We both still thought it was weird, though. Chris thought that maybe there was a truck ahead of us and it bounced off and up into the air and then right in front of us, but that didn't really sound like a logical explanation to me. I told him it was the desert, and a lot of weird stuff does happen out here. I turned on the radio and started punching buttons, trying to listen to AM weather reports instead of Chris, who started to sing Hotel California, since we really were on a dark desert highway. But Chris started singing again, unfazed. And then all of a sudden, boom! Something smashed on the road in front of us, right in front of the car again. I slammed on the brakes and the car slid, and we came just inches short of smashing into this thing that was in the middle of the road. We sat there for a moment, catching our breath. We could see that it was a large carcass of some kind of animal. I realized that this thing in front of us was the body of a cow, and it was just dropped out of the sky on the highway, just like the fish. We were no longer laughing. Shit just got real. Neither of us wanted to get out of the car at that point. I tried to pull around this thing, which was plopped right in the middle of the road. We both just sat there, marveling that a cow literally just fell right out of the sky. Neither one of us had any clue as to how that happened. It wasn't a bird that dropped this thing, Chris said. And his voice sounded really alarmed. I didn't blame him. Like I said, weird stuff happens in the desert all the time, but I'd never heard of a cow falling from the sky in the middle of the road. To top it off, I didn't know if I could even pull around this thing because I was scared we'd get stuck in the sand. I asked Chris if we should get out and move it out of the way, but Chris just wanted to turn back and find a different route because this just felt so wrong. I told him that was a good idea, and I began to back up. But suddenly, this freak sandstorm started coming out of nowhere. It was thick and heavy, and the car actually started rocking back and forth. The wind was actually so brutal that you could hear the sand hitting the sides of the car. Chris, at this point, was freaking out because he didn't understand what was going on. He was in a blind panic. I told him that it was okay, trying to calm him down, that it was just a sandstorm and that it would pass. I told him we should just ride it out, and sandstorms happen out in the desert. He wanted to know how long it could last, and I told him it probably wouldn't be very long. Usually they thin out within minutes. And then, sure enough, after a few more minutes, the sand thinned out and the wind died down. And that was when our headlights cut through the haze of dust on the empty road in front of us. And that freaking cow was gone. Chris looked around in hysterics, asking where it went. He just kept asking me, "Where is it? Where is it?" We looked around the road, the shoulder, the surrounding desert. Nothing. This thing was completely gone. The wind didn't blow it away. We thought that maybe somebody was out there screwing with us, so we did all we could do. I just started driving again. There was no need to back up and turn around because the cow was out of our way, so we just kept on going in the same direction that we had been. But at this point, Chris was really starting to lose it and kept asking me what the hell was going on. He asked if this was normal desert stuff, and I kept telling him no, this is weird, and I didn't know what was going on. I've never experienced anything like that before. We drove for about another 10 minutes or so, and we were both pretty scared at this point. We were looking around for a turnoff, but we couldn't find any, so we decided to stop at a service station in the next town and decide what to do from there. I told him to get the map, and when he was looking at it, BAM! Something smashed into the top of the car. It dented the roof, and it sounded like it rolled off. I saw a shadow flash by the window and drop on the road behind us. Chris was screaming and swearing at this point, and I kept the car moving forward because I was too scared to stop. I had no idea what was going on, and I didn't really want to know. Another thud, and then this big mass dropped in front of us in the middle of the road again. I slammed on the brakes again, trying to avoid hitting this thing for the second time, and we both just stared. Because right there in front of us looked like the same damn cow that was dropped on the road before. Chris screamed. I put the car in reverse and started backing up. But then Chris shouted, "Look, look, look!" He pointed out the windshield at the front of the road as the lights illuminated the cow. But there was something else behind it. The first thing I saw is what looked like giant bat wings, and they were flapping down next to the cow. Chris wondered if it was a bat, but I told him that a bat could not be that big. This thing that we were looking at was huge. We watched this thing for a moment, and the wings descended over the carcass and appeared to start flapping again. It was still difficult to make out details because so much of it was in the shadow behind the cow, but I could see basic shapes in the dark. One lump pulling the other lump off the road and into the desert. Then you can see the shadow lift up the cow and drop it 10 or 20 feet from the road. Chris told me to shine the headlights on this thing, and I thought that was a good idea since it sounded a lot safer than using a flashlight. And besides, I was already angling the car backwards, so I continued backing up and put the lights on this thing. The lights shone on the cow and the bat creature over in the dark, and Chris yelled out once again. Although this time, I yelled with him, and then my mouth dropped open in shock. This thing with humongous bat wings had squatted over the cow and was eating its guts. I mean, it was just pulling handfuls of the guts out and wolfing them down. But it was definitely not a bat. It looked like the damn devil himself. It had a man's face, but these wild horns. When the light hit it, the thing didn't even seem to react. It just sat there eating bloody handfuls of cow guts. And then it started ripping at its own skin, tearing at itself with a mouthful of violent teeth. Both of us started yelling again. I slammed the car in drive and we flew forward. I think it was no more than 10 minutes later when we made it to a service station in Quartzsite, Arizona. There was a guy working the counter where we went to get gas who treated us like we were raving idiots. We were yelling and ranting, and he just sort of wrinkled his brow and then asked how much gas we needed. I rolled back outside and started filling up the tank. Chris hung back, just staring up at the sky like a child that had seen his first star. And then some old guy pulled up across from us and started gassing up. He asked, "You can still drive like that?" He was referring to the crushed roof, of course. I told him we just had some trouble. He chuckled and said, "I saw blood on a bumper before when I hit a deer, but I've never seen a smashed roof covered in blood like that. Looks like you underestimated the weight, How the hell did you get it on there? At first, I didn't even understand what he was talking about, but then Chris walked up behind me, and the man said that it was good that we got it home, but too bad about the roof. Then it dawned on me. It was a deer he thought that we killed. He walked over to the car and started inspecting it. He told us that the problem was we shouldn't be strapping a deer to the top of the car. He said I needed a truck to haul it. Of course, he wasn't thinking that we'd been attacked by some gargoyle-looking demon creature in the middle of the desert. He was just thinking that we'd gone hunting and killed a deer and drove it home. Little did he know that we'd just seen a dragon or gargoyle or some kind of other monster eating a cow in the middle of the desert road. Once the guy pulled away, Chris turned to me with a funny look and asked me what the hell just happened. I told him that I was agreeing with the guy because I just wanted him to leave us alone. We ended up staying at a hotel in Quartzsite that night, and we drove back to San Diego in the morning. We were under the safety of the sunlight, and we felt a lot better there. We agreed we didn't want to be on the desert road anymore at night. I don't know what we would have done if that thing decided to attack the car after we found it. Maybe it was just too full of cow to be interested in us at the time. I was sure that what we saw was a dragon or a gargoyle, but Chris, on the other hand, was sure that it was Satan himself. He took it as a sign and totally changed his life. I don't know if it was the devil, but it sure as hell wasn't anything that people have common knowledge about. It really did look like some twisted gargoyle to me, but they can't exist, right? Maybe it was some kind of dragon. Who knows? Like I told Chris, a lot of weird shit happens out in the desert, and it's going to be a long time, if ever, before you catch me back out there in the middle of the night. This paranormal experience happened back in the summer of 2013 at a state park in central Pennsylvania when I was only around 10 years old. The park had a giant lake in the middle, and it was surrounded by heavy woods that went into nearby properties and farms. It was a smaller park in size, with one small bridge for cars that went over the water in a little bay on Route 177. Next to it was one of the canoe launches where families would launch their boats into the lake. I thought spending the summer there was quite enjoyable, since it was a true escape from people, unless you saw the occasional hiker or boater, but you would only see them on busy weekends. This encounter that I want to tell you about happened on a foggy Monday morning around 6 a.m. when the sun was just coming up. My father was meeting a friend at the canoe launch to hand over some paperwork or something like that, while me and my younger sister were playing in ankle-high water near the bridge. Not even seconds after we stepped into the water, I got this uneasy feeling, like I was being watched by something. It was truly strange because it happened so fast. Me, just being a kid, I thought it was my imagination, or my brain telling me to be careful in the water, so I just brushed it off. I was so wrong. After a few minutes of playing with my sister, a strange fog actually rolled in, like this thick mist, and I actually lost sight of her. The fog was that thick. I couldn't see her anymore. Fear set in, and I began screaming for my father while I searched for my little sister. And then everything went quiet, and my screaming seemed to be absorbed into this strange fog. I was standing there, aimlessly lost for what seemed like an eternity, until the weird fog rolled away, and I heard a soft giggle from my sister, who was standing just a few feet away from me. I was almost sobbing at this point, and I threw my arms around her, and she shoved me off into the water. She asked what was wrong with me, and I started to almost stare at her in this clueless fashion from the water. And then I began yelling at her, telling her I thought that she was lost in the fog. She rolled her eyes at me and told me she didn't feel like pretending right now. I told her that I was serious though, and she honestly looked at me and asked, "What fog?" I thought I was seeing things. I told her that there was this fog that enveloped everybody, and she told me that she was there the whole time, waving to some little boy before I cut her off. She never even saw the fog. I asked her what boy she was talking about because I saw no little boy, and she told me there was a young boy under the bridge. And then all of a sudden, I could see the realization dawn on her. It looked like she was realizing something horrible. Her face contorted into worry, and she trailed off in mid-sentence. I just remember this look of horror that spread across her face as she stood there in this daze for a few seconds before looking at me and saying, "Isn't the water over there too deep, though?" Every person who lived in the area knew this lake was almost bottomless. And in fact, the canoe launch was only a shallow bit of land, and then a few feet out from it, you'd smack off into a drop. It was basically a death trap. So many people lost their lives over the years, and their bodies were never found in the water. Some of their bodies sank to the bottom, I'm sure. I was almost certain she was seeing things, until I saw something standing just 10 yards away, and I swear to you that this outline looked just like a little boy. I stepped closer, even though so many red flags went off in my head. I mean, where were his parents, and how was he standing in the water? It was far too deep for any of us. Then, this cold chill hit me all at once, and I actually started to make out what this little boy looked like. It looked like his skin was loosely hanging from his abnormally pale body. His eyes were more like empty black holes instead of normal eyes. The whole face on this boy just looked wrong, actually. It didn't look like a person at all, more like a creature or some horrifying spirit. I tried asking my sister if that's who she was talking about, but my voice wouldn't get any higher than a whisper, no matter how hard I tried. She told me that's who she was talking about. Apparently, she hadn't noticed how horrible this thing looked because she didn't seem scared by him. I ended up dragging her out of the water, almost screaming for my dad to get to the car, and we ended up crashing into my dad as he was finishing up talking to his friend. He took one look at us and asked in an angry tone what was wrong. I began breaking down. I said there was something in the water, followed by me explaining what I saw. My sister was just standing there, angry that I cut her fun short, but my father must have thought that I was telling the truth because he ended his meeting early. We climbed into his truck and we drove away, but to get home, we had to drive over that bridge. I looked carefully through the window, and I don't know if it was my imagination or not, but I swear to you, I think I saw that kid again. I learned over the years that a young boy drowned in the lake years before this experience. As far as I know, there have actually been 3 boys that drowned throughout the years. The boy I saw could have been any one of them. I don't see this experience as a death wish for angry spirits looking for revenge, but maybe instead it was the remnants of a tragic end and a child who still just wanted to play. I don't think we'll ever know, though. It's just going to be one of those mysteries that haunt us for the rest of our lives.